Right, guys. So I'm Ben Finney. I started off in real estate and construction about 23 years ago in 2002. I started my first little deck building company up in Old Orchard Beach, Maine, and worked the summer. Realized at the end of the summer that everybody just had second homes up there and all the work dried up. And that was my first experience with supply and demand. So packed it up from Old Orchard Beach. Since then, I've lived in 4 states across the country. I moved to Austin, Texas to flip houses. I did that for 6 years and also started a property management company in Austin, Texas. Ran that for from about 2013 to 2020, and 3 years of that was actually remote. So I had kind of gotten my boots on the ground, people there, and had a nice little cash flowing business that I was operating from across the country. I've also owned 3 general contracting, building, remodeling companies over the years. Most recently, actually, after I flipped houses in Austin, Texas, it had gotten so competitive on the buy side of things down there. And in 2015, you guys can all laugh at me. I thought there was no more meat left on the bones in Austin, Texas. So I stopped buying, moved back to New Hampshire, started Concord Construction, ran that for the last 6 years. And so while I was flipping houses, I had a mentor who took me under his wing. He would lend me private money as a private money lender for my deals. And I also raised some of my own friends and family capital while I was doing that to fund. Typically, the way that I would set it up was that I would get funding from my mentor. He would lend money to me at 12% and a few points, and then I would fund the renovations either with some of my own capital or friends and family capital. And I would just do kind of a sideline deal with them and give them 12% capital. And then I actually had a business partner that I took on who would also lend his own private capital, and he would also arbitrage. And he was taking money from his friend in New York City who would do loans against his 401k account, and he would lend it out to investors in Austin, Texas. And so I always had the insight from a borrower perspective on private money and always knew that I wanted to get into it. And then a few years ago, I decided that I'm going to get serious about it and do it myself, and started to wrap my head around it, talk to my friends who knew more about it. 2 years ago, started to really put a business plan together and get serious, and quickly started gaining traction and realizing that I had a little bit of my own capital, but there were friends and family around me who were really interested. And with 10 emails, I had $1 million, and I said, "Whoa, now I don't have any loans. I need to stop raising capital. That was easier than I thought. I might be onto something here." And so about 12 months ago, really started building out the back end. I knew a lot about the construction and real estate side and analyzing deals, and thought I knew everything that I needed to know about lending, and quickly realized there's compliance regulation at the federal and state level. There's licensing requirements in some states. There's borrower underwriting that I really didn't know a lot about. And so I really dug in. I got a mentor out in Washington State who has a private debt fund that now backs me as well as a backstop, and started to really learn about the nitty gritty of the business. Did that for about 7, 8 months. And then 4 or 5 months ago, finally opened my doors to do loans. Have done several loans now, and am continuing to build out my borrower pipeline and my capital pipeline across New Hampshire, Massachusetts, technically North Carolina right now, although I haven't done anything really in North Carolina. I get some leads that come in because I started this business when I was living in North Carolina, but really focused in New England now. And so looking to push forward for the next 3 to 5 years and get my volume up and build relationships. I consider myself relationship based and want to get I don't aspire to be a huge 50 million, $100 million. I really want to just be local and build relationships. And been on the grind in businesses before, and been really stressed out with 7, 8 projects going on at once, and kind of realized that quality of life is as important as just making as much money as possible. So that's kind of how I foresee the next 5 years going for me in the private money space. And I do enjoy being here. There's people in this room that I know that have way more experience than me in real estate investing, so I'm always learning as well. But I have spent hundreds and hundreds of hours learning about private capital in the last 15 years. And so I want to share with you guys as much as I can, and not just let you know what I do and say, hey, this is my sell and hopefully you get a loan from me, but also provide as much value to you guys as you can. It sounds like we have some house flippers. I know we have some commercial investors in the room, and let you guys know what that might look like for you, how private money can really best serve you guys, and not just coming to me as a private lender, but true private capital, which means that you guys are out there in the initial stage. It's usually looking like you're going to your own friends and family and raising capital from them and utilizing that on your deals. Now, why would I come out and be pitching myself and say, hey, you guys should do this, not use me? I've done it before. I know that when I was flipping houses full time, I didn't have enough time to be out raising enough capital to do all my deals, and I ended up going to private money lenders. So, selfishly, that would be my hope, that we do develop a relationship. But again, I really believe that what goes around comes around, and so I just want to provide you guys as much value. Anybody has any questions at any point, just raise your hand, and we have a good sized group here to kind of do a mastermind style. If anybody has input, experiences, stories to tell, happy to hear that. So that's a little bit about my background. All right, guys, so Q4 is almost upon us. It's not technically fall yet. It's starting to feel like fall to me. That's my favorite season now. I actually used to like summer in New Hampshire. Then I moved to Austin, Texas for 15 years, got absolutely sick of sunshine, and now autumn is my favorite season in New England. So this was actually this weekend. I was down in Pennsylvania visiting family, and we were sitting around a campfire, and my girlfriend looked up and said, oh my gosh, look at that. Looks like a witch in the sky. So that was actually a picture that we took with the moon behind it. I thought that was pretty cool. So my question to you guys that you can ask yourself, how are you? Oh, baseball player. Yeah, a witch might have been a dark interpretation. It's like the blot test. We were all, after that, we're saying, oh, that one looks like a skull. And I'm like, is anybody going to come up with anything positive here? We went dark. So my question to you guys, how are you going to make your business thrive coming up in Q4? So let's keep that question in mind. And with that, you know what? Let me see here. Okay. So I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit. Let me grab my book so I can read this quote to you guys. So this book has actually shifted my mindset. I've always been big into personal development, and this is one of the best books that I've ever read on mindset, and it's really helped me to get my this business iteration off on a good foot. So this is written by a guy named Dr. Price Pritchett, and his theories evolved around building a quantum leap into your life and business. He's actually advised almost every Fortune 500 company, and a quantum leap in physics is when a particle goes from one area to another area with seemingly without going in the space in between. And so I got kind of obsessed with the principle of a quantum leap a few years ago. And so this book, this is one of the first pages. It says, right now in this moment, you are capable of exponential improvement in your performance. You can multiply your personal effectiveness, hit new highs, and shatter your old achievement records. The results you can have will be hard for you to imagine. You can become U squared. You don't have to settle for things as they are now. That can change dramatically. If you're ready, life is prepared to give you a breakthrough experience. You can jump to a higher orbit of achievement, live the dream, enjoy a completely different plane of success. Also, you don't have to be content with improving things incrementally or gradually. Just as your level of performance can improve drastically, so can your rate of accomplishment. Furthermore, the U squared formula requires far less effort than you've given in the past. You haven't been reaching your full potential. So far, you haven't even come close. No matter how you wish to measure success, regardless of how you define achievement, you have barely scratched the surface of what you can personally accomplish. But maybe the time has come to change all that. Maybe you're ready to make a quantum leap. All right, so let's talk about what is private money. This is where if you guys decide to raise your own private capital, or you get involved in joint venture partnerships, Anytime you're structuring a deal without your own capital or without traditional institutional capital, you really need to start being aware of all the compliance issues. Because, for instance, if you lend out your own capital or you have capital that comes in from an investor, if things go bad, so what I've realized in structuring this business model is there are a lot of people out there doing a lot of wrong structuring around private capital, and they're getting away with it. And some of them are getting away with it for their entire lifetime, and some of them are doing dozens or hundreds of deals. But it's when things go south. If you have an investor, I've had people in my mastermind cohort that I was a part of a coaching program the first 2 quarters of this year, where a deal went south, and this woman in particular was from down south, and she was kind of brokering and structuring fractionalizing, which means multiple investors on one note, which is a very advanced way to do it, and you really need to really have a fund to do it that way. You shouldn't be fractionalizing unless you're set up with a fund, and that doesn't make sense until you're $7 to $10 million deep. And so she had this deal going, and it went south. And one of the investors wanted to pull her capital out. She was in this note with 5 other investors, and she started to become a squeaky wheel, and multiple investors were disagreeing on the way things went. That's when things can really go bad, as far as if somebody picks up the phone and calls a compliance regulation authority, whether it be state or federal. That's when tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars, or in some cases millions of dollars, can literally be lost. So when we're dealing with private capital, it's really important just to understand a basic level of what's going on. So what are the different ways that you can structure private capital? If you guys are raising capital for your own deals, one of the easiest and cleanest ways you can do it, if you have friends and family capital, it's called whole note placement. So you have one investor on one note. And that doesn't mean that you can't have multiple investors on one project. It means that you need to, if you have a $500,000 house that you want to finance, and one of your friends or one of your family members or somebody that you have a built history relationship with has 300,000, you put them in first place. And then you have another couple people that have 100,000, you put them in second and third place, which usually when you do that, you will give them a little bit higher return because they're in a junior lien position, and that's a little bit more risky. And again, if the regulatory authorities come looking, they're going to want to make sure that you had full disclosure that I'm not guaranteeing anything. I'm not guaranteeing a specific rate. Bernadette pointed that out to me. It's very sketchy for me and potentially out of compliance with the SEC to advertise that I am providing a specific rate. Usually you want to give a range, and you can never use the word guarantee. So disclosure is really important, and it's really important that you structure, again, whole note placement. So the interesting thing about all these laws, security laws, laws are very arbitrary. Oftentimes they're written in a way where they can be interpreted based on what the judge might rule in any given case. So when we're operating within a specific set of laws, we're operating on a spectrum, right? And so we're looking at, in the case of securities laws, how can I be as safe as possible? Nothing is black or white, but one of the ways to be as safe as possible is to do whole note placement with people that you have a previous history and a formed relationship with, meaning it's not somebody that you just met off the street. You disclose to them that what you're doing is not guaranteed, and there are risks associated with this investment, and that you're analyzing. So if you have a pre-existing relationship with somebody, really the safest way, again, this comes to the spectrum, the safest way to do it is that to vet that person as an accredited investor. It doesn't always have to be that. The next level is a sophisticated investor. It doesn't always have to be that, but again, that's the safest way to do it. Even if it's your grandmother, and you say, hey, I need this 200,000 to fill the gap in the second lien position to do this $500,000 house, and that's grandma's last $200,000, and she can't even make her house payment or buy food without it, and you told Graham, hey, I guarantee you that you're going to get $2,000 a month from this for the next year, and then the deal goes south, A, Thanksgiving is going to be very awkward from then on, and B, if the regulatory authorities, even though it's your grandmother, came in, they're going to look at that situation and see how did you vet her, even though she's not a sophisticated or accredited investor. You took her last $200,000. So that's going to be looked on negatively if things went south and you ever did go in front of some type of regulatory authority. And not only can money be lost, guys, but we're talking about white collar crime, potential prison. Again, there are safe ways to do this, and we just need to be educated about what we're doing out there. So that's whole note placement. There are ways to do it where you can just do a prom note into your LLC, talking about that risk spectrum where we're at the most safe end of the spectrum. Now we're starting to move over to more risky territory where we're starting to move into what might be considered selling securities, which is the Securities and Exchange Commission is who regulates these things on the federal level. And so if you are now, go ahead, Chris.
You refer to prom note?
Yeah.
What is a prom note?
Yeah, promissory note, just the same as a piece of real estate. Sorry. Yeah, you can wear your tuxedo to go sign it if you want, but
no, I understand.
Yeah. So
obviously that was an acronym for something.
Yeah, so effectively, if you're doing something like that or some kind of security instrument, now, and especially if you have multiple people involved in the situation where now you have 3 people lending you money into your LLC and you're taking that capital and going to do projects with it. Again, I know people who do this all the time. I know attorneys who told me I could do this. And it's not necessarily the case. So I've consulted with 7 or 8 attorneys, some of them state specific, some of them national level securities attorneys. And I was getting different answers all over the place on how should I be structuring this business. Some of them, hey, just get an LLC and give them a prom note and just have people invest in your LLC. I will say that the most intelligent and well-versed attorneys that I found were at, and I have no affiliation with these people. They don't even represent me. I just had some mentorship calls with them. They're now called Fortra Law, previously Gerasi out of California. And they're very well-resourced, very expensive, and also very niche in the private money field, which is a niche space, and it's tough to find attorneys who are very well versed in this and do this on a daily basis. They do. So there's a specific attorney over there, Kevin Kim, who's kind of the head of the private money aspect of the business that I really rely on what he says. And if you guys want any of this information, I mean, you can just look up Kevin Kim, get on their mailing list and jump on webinars with them and just kind of absorb information as they put it out. They're really good about newsletters and sharing information because they want the clientele. So according to Kevin Kim, you're starting to get a little bit more on the risk side of the spectrum when you're doing something like a prom note. Similar vein is going to be if you're structuring it with a participation agreement, which is kind of a similar vehicle, and there are multiple ways you can do it. You can do a participation agreement bringing multiple investors into your LLC, or you can do a participation agreement to structure it in an LLC that's purchasing, and so the multiple investors are actually on the deed, which makes it a little bit safer. And another factor that the regulatory agencies, both federal and state, will consider if it comes down to looking at it is how involved each investor that put capital into the deal is. And so how active is that investor? Were they actively doing the due diligence before at the pre-close phase, at the pre-buy phase? How much time did they put in? How much information did they have in front of them that was emailed to them, told to them verbally? Again, disclosures signed. That's where disclosure. I actually came across an investor who used to do all his closings. He was kind of an off-market investor. And with the homeowners, he would actually videotape all of his, when he would get his purchase and sale signed, he would videotape it. which is pretty bulletproof, right? Because if you get a contract signed that's 25 pages with fine print, everything can be challenged in court. And so somebody can challenge even a written agreement for unconscionability if they say, well, I didn't really understand this, and it's an elderly person that you're buying it from. Well, if you have that person on video saying, yes, I understand, I'm buying this for 150,000, it might be worth 200,000 on the market, but I have to carry the mortgage payments. I have all this work that I have to do. Do you agree? Yes, I do. That's pretty rock solid. So disclosure, participation agreements, again, a little bit more risky. Now you're starting to get to closer to, this is definitely a securities instrument. This is definitely something that is going to be regulated by the SEC. So when you're raising capital from strangers, there are ways to do that where you're going through your own network. Now you're going past the line if you're going outside of your own network and you're soliciting capital, what the SEC calls general solicitation. So this is when you're actively doing some kind of, even right now, if I were saying something like, trying to solicit capital from you guys, that would be considered general solicitation. In order to not be regulated by the SEC and solicit capital from strangers, we need to be operating under Regulation D, 506B or 506C, which is an exemption from being regulated by the SEC. And there are certain criteria you have to meet. B allows you to have non-accredited investors, but you can't generally solicit. So it really needs to be a word of mouth type situation. There's a lot of intricacies. I didn't do my disclaimer, guys. I'm not a lawyer. This is not legal advice. So take everything that I say with a grain of salt. This is just based on my research. And when you start getting into these things, and laws are also always changing and fluid. So that's something else to be aware of at the federal and state level. So Regulation 506B, Regulation 506C, you're allowed to go out and solicit capital, but you have to do it under very strict parameters. 506C, you're actually allowed to generally solicit, but very early on in the process, you have to make sure that you're vetting people that they are accredited investors. You can only take on accredited investors if you're raising capital under a 506C Regulation D exemption. So that is the way where you can start to scale out your real estate business, or me as a private money lender, which right now I'm pretty good, probably up to a few $1 million within my network. But if I want to start taking things to the next level, I'm going to have to start looking at 506B, 506C. You can raise capital and operate under those without actually setting up a fund and starting a fund. But that's even the next level of raising capital, where now you're allowed to do a lot more things, and you're allowed to do kind of mix and match with having not just fractionalizing with multiple investors on a single note, but also you're allowed to take investors' capital and put it on multiple notes that you might have going on, or multiple projects you might have going on. A lot more lenient, but the legal compliance with the SEC, you now have annual filing requirements depending on who you have set your fund up. I know Jurassic, you're looking at 40 to 60,000 to get it set up, another 40 to 50,000 in annual filing legal fees. And so that really doesn't make sense until you're dealing with a minimum of $7 to $10 million that you've got out on the streets, where you're going to actually start your own debt fund. So that's kind of the spectrum. And there are other ways that you can set up and structure private capital to do your deals, but those are kind of the main boxes that you might consider.
So when you say vetting for accredited investors,
Yep.
what is the criteria?
Yeah, I think accredited investors are a minimum of either $1 million net worth, or that's what it was 5 years ago. I don't know if that's been updated, and or they have to have, I think, a married couple, 300,000 in income coming in. Does anybody know the exact criteria? Yeah, it's 250, 250 single, 300 married. So it's not, it's not crazy. And then there is sophisticated too. I haven't delved into that stage of raising capital. That's kind of probably 2, 3 years out for me. So I'm not super familiar with it, but it's not a crazy level of net worth requirement.
And the other question is, I know you're not a lawyer, and I don't know how well you can answer, but when you say when you get to the prom notes,
Mm-hmm.
it's another level of risk.
Mm-hmm.
How do you express that level of risk? What really is?
Yeah, basically, so what starts happening is if any regulatory body or regulatory agency started looking at a deal, and typically that's my understanding, it's only going to happen if someone raises a flag and makes a call or something like that, is they're going to say, were you selling securities? And so there's a difference between collateralized, so like whole note placement, when that capital is backed directly by a piece of real estate. The regulatory agencies consider that much more secure than if you get a prom note against your LLC, where you now have free reign to effectively do whatever you want with that capital.
What if it's a prom note and a personal guarantee?
Again, you're just on a spectrum. So can I say that's right or wrong? I can't. It just, if compared to the safest vehicle, I have 123 Main Street and I'm purchasing this. I'm using this investor's capital, placing it directly on, giving them a prom note, and they're actually on the deed as well. That's going to be the safest position to be on the spectrum. You're starting to move into a riskier place, depending on if you ever got in front of a judge. Depending on who's looking at it, you're moving onto this way on the spectrum as you move further away from that whole note placement with an accredited investor that you have an established relationship with. So there's not like clearly defined boxes.
Yep.
And again, disclosure, many people doing it for a long time and never having any issues with it. So it's just kind of, and me as a private money lender, it also, how many deals you're doing oftentimes will, that ups the level of risk in your bookkeeping and your transparency with what's going on. Again, it's just that spectrum. I would just say disclosure, transparency, communication with your investors, and
knowing them, knowing their
yeah. And again, if you have a pre-established relationship, that's not even necessarily always necessary. It's, there's accredited, there's sophisticated. That really comes into play when you're raising capital from strangers. And again, just on the spectrum, you're going to be safer if they're accredited versus not accredited. It's tough to say, is that right or wrong?
What do they consider an established relationship? Like they met people at a real estate investors association, got to know each other, and they had a deal, and they reached out to those people and said, "Hey, anybody interested in investing?" What is?
That's a good question.
Long-term relationship? Or are we talking?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. Yeah, I don't know if there's a clearly defined box to that answer either. I've just heard that term, like established relationship, but I don't actually know the answer to that. Yeah, again, I think it's just on a spectrum, and it would just weigh in on any decision that was getting made about what was okay and what wasn't if things went wrong. Yeah. So those are kind of the ways that you can structure. I mentioned joint venture. Joint venture is when people are typically putting their own capital in and going in on a project, or there's the investors are active. That's where a joint venture, they're really looking at the level of involvement of each investor and the way that you legally structure it. Typically with a joint venture, they're either going to be co-managers on an LLC that's managing a project directly on the deed, Again, there are multiple ways you can structure a joint venture that is going to be less on the security side when all of the investors are actively involved in the project. So cross-collateralization, this is a little bit outside of this box of structuring, but one of the things that I do through BJF Lending to make deals work is utilizing portfolio equity. It's called, some people call it portfolio lending, where you can actually utilize equity built up in a real estate portfolio to cross-collateralize and meet my underwriting criteria, which I'm trying to stay at under 70% loan to as-is value of subject property. And so that's something to keep in mind that you guys can use to leverage your position if you have equity built up. And again, I'm usually looking to stay at 70% loan to as-is value of all collateralized assets. So if you have assets that are 65% LTV or lower, whether it's with me as a lender or Brian as a lender, or even if you're looking to get an investor in and give yourself some leverage, cross-collateralization is a way that you can utilize your equity in your portfolio to do that.
That's not including your personal property.
It depends. So I'm not licensed to do personal loans. That requires typically a mortgage loan origination license, right, Brian? Is it MLO license that you don't do personal loans either?
They just handle that. I'm more of like a borrower and deal guy.
Yeah. So as a private money lender, the way that I'm structured, I don't hold any brokers or mortgage licenses. I'm not required to in New Hampshire or Massachusetts. I'm looking to go into Rhode Island, Connecticut. None of those 4 states require it. And so, yeah, that
I just hadn't heard of portfolio lending type of situations, except for not in hard money or private.
I can't do private residence, but definitely can do like 1 to 4 family. Commercial loans typically have an acceleration clause that will not allow it. Most commercial loans will not allow a second lien position. There would be some kind of acceleration clause. So I can't touch anything personal residence. Yeah.
How do you raise capital?
So that's a loaded question, but I can tell you right now, I have a 25-page business plan investor presentation that I actually thought about sharing with you guys, but to be honest with you, I think it was overkill. And
25 pages?
Yep.
Probably 23 pages of it.
Yes, exactly. So the real answer to that, and it's a really good question, and I think it's pertinent to all of us, not just how I raise capital, but I really believe that I actually have a slide on it. Let's jump over to it. Capital raising tips. So I remember going to a conference in Houston, a real estate conference in probably 2014, and there was a guy named JT Fox who was this big marketer, and I had run into him a couple times, and he would do these little consultations trying to sell his coaching program, and he would kind of give us advice. And one of his pieces of advice to me was, hey, you need to build a brand. And as a young guy just trying to find my next flip house, I was like, I'm not Coca-Cola. I don't have $1 million marketing budget. How am I going to build a brand? And now I'm 41 years old, and his advice kind of has caught up to me, and I realized what he meant. A brand doesn't have to be this big, huge marketing campaign. It doesn't have to be multi-million-dollar marketing budget. A brand as a solopreneur, as entrepreneurs, is just who we are. So it's standing by our word. It's having some marketing, certainly, and having a good foundation these days. I would say if you're trying to raise $1 million or $2 million or even $300,000 to flip a house, somebody's probably going to want to see a website if they don't know you really well. People want to see dedication. What I've learned is that, they say 95% of entrepreneurs fail in the first year, or anyways, on the books, people that start an LLC, probably half of those or 70% aren't even doing anything. But there's something to be said for showing people that you're weathering the storm, that you're going through the hard points of building a business. You're getting through that initial dip where everything is really romantic about starting a business and it looks good on paper, but then you get into the trenches and the rubber hits the road, and it's always a lot harder for me anyways, I've built several companies. It's always a lot harder than I think it's going to be at the outset. So I think building a brand, part of that is showing stick-to-itiveness for at least a few years. So when I see somebody start a business and they're into it for 6 months and they're jazzed about it, and things are seemingly going well, it's like, okay. And then they're a year in, and then they're 2 years in, and then they're 3 years in, and they're still doing it, and it's starting to sustain, or maybe they had explosive growth right from the beginning. That to me, so I think time in is a big part of building a brand. Sticking to your word, being transparent, always knowing our limitations, and being able to look at a situation and say, hey, maybe I'm actually not the person for you, but I know this guy Brian, he works with a little bit of a bigger company, or his buy box is a little bit different. Why don't you give Brian a call? He might be a better option for you for this, and he might be able to give you a lower rate. So I think that raising capital comes down to being a trustworthy person and being somebody that people understand you've put in the work, educated yourself to really know what you're doing. At the outset, it's kind of an interesting balance because, of course, having a track record is the best thing you can do. You can show these people, hey, I've done 100 flips and I'm good to go. This is my balance sheet, and I have 20 doors and I'm making 20,000 a month off of my passive income. Can I have a loan? Versus right in the beginning, it's like, well, I don't have that track record, but I've known these people for 10 years and I've never done anybody wrong. And this is the education that I've done, and this is the work that I've put in. So I think that raising capital is really a relationship-based, at least at my level, a relationship-based activity. And the stick-to-itiveness can really go a long way. So that's that. Let's talk about legal. So I'll go back to my story about, I started off, I wanted to find the right attorney. I have a friend of a friend down in Austin who's a banker level securities attorney, commercial securities attorney. And I said, great, like he's really well educated and he just has all this knowledge and he has 13 years of heavy commercial level experience behind him. I called him up, his name's Matt. And we had an initial orientation call and a discovery call. And he said, yeah, I've got this participation agreement that, this is how you should probably structure it. You should do a participation agreement, and that's how you can raise capital and put it together and lend it out for deals. Arbitrage is part of how I do it. I raise capital and I lend capital. And he sent me over a 26-page document that was for a $13 million loan that 3 of these banks were doing together. And I looked at it and I'm like, what does this mean? And it was too much. Like, he didn't understand the level of private capital I was at. Since then, again, I've consulted with at least 6 or 7 other attorneys that really didn't understand the private money lending, or didn't understand one component of the private money lending business. So I've realized that on the legal side of things, attorneys are typically very niche. The legal field is a wide and broad world out there. And even within real estate, like a foreclosure attorney is going to be a different person, in my experience, than a securities attorney. And a commercial securities attorney is going to be different than a state level, smaller, private lender type attorney. And that person a lot of the times can do the closings. So sometimes they do overlap, but it's just really important to understand that to have the right legal when you're getting into this money game is really important, and it's typically worth the upfront investment to have a good attorney on your team. In each state that I've gone into, like North Carolina, it was really difficult. I mean, I probably vetted 22 to 24 attorneys before I found one. One of my questions is, do you do private money loans on a daily basis, like multiple times a week? And even people who on their website advertised real estate specific attorney, even closing attorney, oftentimes the answer was no, I don't. So I would say in real estate, it's really important when we're getting into the nitty gritty and we need specific answers to make sure you have a solid legal team, and it's worth putting in the effort up front to make sure that your structure is foundationally sound from a legal perspective. So let's talk about underwriting, real estate and borrower. So like I said, when I came into this game of private money lending, I had all these years of construction experience behind me, all these years of house flipping and being able to analyze the deals and value the deals. Didn't have as much multifamily, but I understood it. You know, you're going into a cash flow analysis as opposed to a comparable sales analysis. And so when it came to that, I was pretty solid. And each market is different, but you can kind of get a general sense, even without a real estate license these days. I always wanted to have access to the MLS so I could really dig in heavy on the numbers, and that's really helpful, you know, to have somebody on your team that can do that. But even outside of that, if you can get a general idea of what the after repair value of a house is, and I think the construction side is where a lot of people go wrong, and things are changing so fast. Labor rates, materials rates have been all over the place in the last 5 years. So as a contractor, I even understood, like, a lot of the times I don't know what's happening this year. If I haven't done that type of project for 12 months, I have no idea. So when I'm looking at a deal and vetting someone on the real estate and the borrower side, the more construction that's involved, the riskier it is. I know that as a contractor, there's so many things that can go wrong with construction, not just cost overruns, but just from a liability perspective of somebody potentially getting hurt. Construction is a very risky industry, one of the riskiest industries. And so when I'm looking at a deal, and this is a helpful concept for anybody that's looking to buy discounted real estate or do value adds to real estate, I look at it as two components. If you're looking for distressed property, there's dilapidation and there's physical distress, and then there's situational distress. So the best deals that I flipped were light on the construction and the property dilapidation and distress, and it was really a situational aspect of that real estate and that seller situation that gave me the value add, right? And so that's something that I kind of try to help people that come to me to borrow, and they, you know, there's a lot of people out there who are getting into the game and learning, and that's fine. You know, we've all been there. I always try to tell them, you know, you need to start looking at it from that lens of what are the situations that I need to be looking for to get myself with a decent amount of walk-in equity, not just, oh, that property, you know, it looks like I could go put my finger on it and it would fall over. That's going to be a great flip house. Well, not necessarily. So that's kind of a macro perspective of how I look at my initial desktop analysis when a deal comes in is, all right, how much construction is involved? What's the situation going on here? And then the next big thing that I learned looking at a deal and a borrower situation and the business plan as a whole of that real estate situation is the exit strategy. So you come in for a fix and flip, you're going to be doing a retail exit most of the time, or if you're doing wholetailing, you're going to be going in and you're going to be selling it off to another investor without doing much construction. Good strategy. Or you might be doing a buy, get some construction renovations in there, get the property stabilized, and then refinance out with more traditional financing. And so when I look at those situations, I'm making sure that if someone is wanting to refinance out, that borrower is in a solid position on the back end to actually get a loan. They're loanable, right? So if you guys want to make yourself attractive to a lender, or you guys start to do what I'm doing and what Brian does, that's a really important component. It's like looking down the road. It's kind of a chess game. What is the whole business plan? What is the exit strategy? So if it's a retail flip and they're looking to unload it on the MLS and get it up to speed and up to par with the neighborhood, make sure they're not over renovating. Make sure that they have a track record. Like, again, I've seen it even as a 23-year experienced contractor. I know what a project looks like on paper. oh yeah, this is a $72,000 project. If I see somebody hand me a scope of work and a proposal that says this is a $72,000 flip, and they've never done a $72,000 renovation before, I'm like, that's $125,000 all day. That's like the first thing that's maybe a little bit pessimistic, but that's the reality of how I think about construction. There's just so much that can go wrong. Right. So that's kind of how I look at underwriting. And to back it up and go back to the macro level, the first thing that I'm looking at as a lender when it comes in, I'm looking at what is the as-is walk-in value of this property. I'm really wanting to stay below 70% loan to as-is value. I'm wanting some skin in the game, especially if I don't have an established relationship with somebody in the form of a down payment, 5 to 10%, or cross-collateralization that can get us at those numbers. That's just the reality of it. If somebody doesn't necessarily have a ton of cash, again, you can consider that joint venture partnership type situation where you can offer somebody a percentage split. You can start to utilize some of these structuring techniques where somebody has cash and they can make a loan. There's a million different ways you can structure it, but I can tell you that from my experience, the hardest part of doing house flips, doing buy and holds is finding that discounted property. So I would say if somebody knows how to do that, and that's where somebody is putting their time in, once you have that deal, the money is typically pretty easy to find. And if you're not in a strong cash position, I would say start reaching out to your network, get that true private capital. Again, I'm a private money lender, but that true private capital for real estate investors is going to be either friends and family capital, or the next level, you even get a little more sophisticated with it and you start to raise capital outside of your network. And heck, the people who are really good at this game are doing both sides of the coin. I did that with house flipping and I was able to raise a little, but you get out what you put in business. That's what I say. And I'll be the first to admit it. I didn't scale up to the point where I was doing millions and millions a year. There are people out there that do that. I commend them. And there are a lot of skill sets within this realm of real estate investing, even if you're just sticking to residential and flipping houses. If you're also raising the true private capital, I mean, at a certain point, if you're going over a few projects, you're effectively becoming a fund manager, which is kind of the direction that this business model that I've chosen is. And it's a whole different skill set than being able to manage contractors and doing the marketing for direct mail marketing or whatever it might be to find those distressed off market properties. So a lot going on. This is the niche that I'm going to be focused on for the next 3 to 5 years. But there's a lot of skill sets here that you guys can utilize within the private money realm to boost. It sounds like there's people doing different things in here to be able to make a deal work and put this private money aspect into your toolbox so that you might know a couple private money lenders, but you understand the criteria in our buy box. You can say, all right, this is what I need to hit. I don't quite have that cash, but let me go out and figure out how I can get some joint venture partners who, maybe you offer them 15, 16%, or maybe, some cut of the deal where you really sweeten it, but they're contributing just a smaller portion of the capital so that it's not washing away all your profits, but you're still able to make the deal work. All right, benefits of private money. So there's options out there when you're going in to finance a real estate deal. At one end of the spectrum, you have traditional bank financing, which of course is going to be heavily regulated with the Frank-Dodd Act. The government's got their hands in all of those loans and really tight lending criteria depending on where the economy is going and what's happening with the real estate market. It can be really tough if you're doing whatever type it might be. If it's FHA, I remember in Austin, we had a lot of problems with the clay soil was drying out when I moved there in 2009, and it was causing the slab foundations to sink. And some of the houses I was looking at, it would be like from here to that corner would be like 6 inches lower. And FHA financing actually has a stipulation in there where you can't be more than, I think it was 2 inches out of level within 30 feet. And so, there's a lot of inspection criteria. So traditional bank financing, not always feasible when you're going into a serious physical dilapidation situation. If you're going into a situational distressed situation, oftentimes the timeline comes into play where this thing needs to close in 2 weeks, or it's getting foreclosed, or whatever it might be. I bought houses from people who, I remember one of the first ones I did, this young guy, he just was moving to California and he's like, I'm leaving in 2 weeks. I want to be gone. And I don't know if there was more to the situation. That's what he told me, but he was like, can you do it in 2 weeks? I'm like, yeah, I can, because I have my private money lender. So that hard money lenders, institutional capital, again, usually are doing a little bit more volume than a traditional smaller private money lender like myself. Maybe a little bit tighter criteria, but you can get a little bit better rates. So you learn the bigger hard money people's buy box, lend box, and you understand that, and that might be a good fit for some of your deals. And true private capital, I certainly have underwriting criteria. I make it up. I also have underwriting criteria that I communicate to my capital investors. I also partner with my friend out in Washington State who has a private debt fund. They have their underwriting criteria that if I'm kind of brokering loans to them, I have to meet that. So, but we can be a little bit more flexible sometimes than the more institutional hard money people. Can close fast. I'm relationship based. I do portfolio lending, so that's kind of my sweet spot, and I have a little bit of a carved out niche inside of that spectrum of lenders. So that's kind of how private money can be beneficial over other forms of capital. So if you guys are looking to raise private capital, one of the big leverage points that you can utilize is self-directed IRA accounts. So I have friends that rolled over IRA accounts into self-directed IRA accounts, and I now utilize that money. Technically, that self-directed IRA is my investor, and they are investing that capital with me and growing it tax deferred. So that is something that is a big leverage point. If you know people that are that have IRAs, and now there's actually an executive order out. I don't know how much you've heard about this, Brian, or I'd be curious to hear how much about this anybody has heard. There's an executive order right now where they're wanting to allow alternative assets to be out of 401ks, to be invested in out of 401ks. So I'm pretty sure it's something like there's $25 billion in self-directed IRAs right now, and there's like $2 trillion in 401ks. So Trump basically said the regulatory agencies need to roll out stipulations and regulations around this in the next 180 days. And it sounds to me like it has a really good chance of actually coming to fruition. So this is actually going to be huge, guys, for the private money world. If this actually gets passed through, and it's going to depend on the custodians and the companies, and it's not going to happen immediately, but this executive order that's out right now, if it comes to fruition, could mean a massive amount of capital coming into private equity, private debt deals. And that means for everybody in this room that's doing anything in real estate, light bulbs and bells should be dinging off in your head with this. So that's a really good option, in my opinion, for people. And as we become more experienced as investors, whatever level we're at, once you really understand how to underwrite a deal, in my mind, there's no more secure investment, and there's nothing that you have more control over than a solid piece of real estate in a market that you really understand, and you really understand how to operate that real estate. So when I look at a deal, I'm really confident at this stage of my career, I can figure out how much that's worth. I can figure out approximately how much equity is in it. I lived through 2008. I had my thumb on the pulse of real estate. I understand things can go south and it can hit the fan. Even that being said, that's one of the aspects, even with the comparative sales analysis. What if I had to go to plan C, what could I rent this out for? Very rarely have rents slid backwards, and maybe some other people have gone through markets where that actually has happened. I haven't, but there's ways where we can keep capital really safe in real estate. So I believe that real estate is a great investment, and I think it's a great option. And if this becomes available, I think that's going to be a really good thing for the American people and investors as a whole. And the way that going back to Bernadette's question about how do I raise capital, again, transparency. So one of my sell points to anybody that has capital that they're thinking about investing with me through loans, I say, hey, look, I'm going to literally send you all of the information, all of my desktop analysis, underwriting. You're going to get to see, heck, if you're in the area, you can even come walk through the house with me. This is exactly what you're investing in. Oftentimes it's local. I actually have some investors on the West Coast, out of California, so they're not local, but typically if it's somebody who's close by, people care about that stuff. They want to invest in their local community, and that's pretty cool. They're not investing in, Bayer Monsanto or some evil corporation through their 401k where they're contributing to some pretty shady practices out there in the corporate world. So people care about that. Of course, people typically care about their return more than that. And my answer to that is with real estate, again, I really understand the construction in the real estate, and now I understand the borrower underwriting side. I feel confident that I can safely place people's capital, and I think you guys as real estate investors, that's a real big skill that you have that can sell people on raising capital for yourself. I think a lot of people like real estate and want to invest in real estate. Hey Bernadette, what time does this meeting end? 8:30. Okay.
When you're done.
When I'm done.
Yeah.
Oh, we can go all night on this stuff. Yeah.
No, we can't.
That's true. Yeah. Nobody wants that. So these are some of the flip deals. This was one. So you guys will see these numbers and laugh. That was in Texas. I mean, Austin is pretty similar to Northeast prices now, but this was back in 2012. I bought this one for $52,000, believe it or not. I did some light, actually the foundation right here was sinking a little bit on this one. I was into it for 15, 20, 25, and then I sold it for 95,000. So again, net profit margin on that, 36,000. So if you guys are out there flipping houses or doing multifamily deals, when you start to look at net profit margin, internal rate of return, that can be a really, even though you might not be offering an investor that level because you need to keep profit for yourself, if you can show investors that, hey, like this is the profit margin that I'm dealing with here. And another aspect of the construction is once you get your crews going and you start to feed subcontractors work on a regular basis, you can start to get less than retail market rates for the work you're getting too. So that's a big part of what I look at is how experienced people are with managing the projects, but also are they using the same subcontractors and contractors, GCs, that they have in the past. They have an established relationship, and that means they're not getting hit with market rates for construction, which can be astronomical right now. This was one that I did in Austin, a little bit outside of downtown. I purchased this for $120 and did just some light landscaping. I actually held on to this one for a couple of years. Austin was funny back then because it was the fastest growing city in the nation. It was growing at 3.6% population growth. And the next fastest growing was Charlotte, North Carolina, which was like 2.2. So Austin was just exploding. And every quarter that I held this, I was just watching the value go up and up and up. And I'm like, I should probably just hang on to it. And I eventually sold it for $250,000 after putting, I guess I paid some money on interest. I had a 12% loan on it, but all said and done, I had a 42% profit margin on that one. I made $50,000, so that was pretty good. And this one was actually a house where it was a big real estate distressed situation. Austin has this place called Brushy Creek, and this was a golf course side house that had a river that had flooded, and I think it was a 100-year floodplain, but they ended up changing that and it had 3 feet of water in it 3 weeks before I bought it. Bought it with my partner, actually, who is my private money lender, good friend of mine now. And so we went in, had to tear out sheetrock and mold. I educated myself about what the government agencies require as far as mold remediation to be safe. And bleach is actually an acceptable means of remediating mold. And I don't know if that's changed. I think it was the CDC that governed that. So we went in and cut 4 feet of drywall out, did bleach and mold remediation, there was like a 1-inch layer of silt in the whole thing. And we actually ended up wholetailing that one. And I don't even think we owned it for a month. We bought it for $88,000, cleaned it up, and sold it for $165,000. So, that was a high profit deal where I didn't even have to make a single payment to my private money lender, who was actually my business partner on that one. So, obviously these numbers are no longer relevant today. I haven't flipped a house since 2015, but that is kind of just a little bit of a overview of what it looked like for me when I was flipping houses. And my point with showing these deals is that the first year that I moved to Austin, I looked at easily over 70, 80 houses. I was contracting. I brought my contracting company down there, and every spare moment I had We Buy Houses signs out. I was doing direct mailing. I was just looking at deals left and right. And lucky for me, I had actually met my mentor in a meeting just like this. It's Austin, I think it's called Austin Area Real Estate Investment Association. And the first month I was there, I met my mentor. And what he did for me was I started to get antsy, and it was like fear of missing out. And I was like, I want to do a deal. I want to do a deal. He taught me that I really needed to stick to my criteria. And that was an invaluable lesson, because looking back early on, if I had pulled the trigger on some of the deals that I wanted to do, I probably would have lost money. Even though on paper it looked like, oh, maybe I will make 10 or 20,000 on this flip house, I don't think it would have been the case. And so my point with that was, this is a competitive business. Real estate is a competitive business. And if we can learn to systematize marketing in the case of flipping houses or whatever it is we're doing, I think that systematizing, having our criteria and really sticking to that, and not making emotional decisions about a numbers game, that was a really invaluable lesson for me. So as that pertains to my lending company, I follow these guys that are called the Hard Money Bankers. They have this podcast out, and I organized this little cohort mastermind meeting of private money lenders from across the country. There's just a handful of us, and one of my fellow members told me about these guys. He said, "Look, I did the $25,000 coaching. Just go listen to their podcast. All the information is right there. Just go listen from the beginning." And one of the really big pieces of information that I took from them, they're really good at quantifying and analyzing their metrics, was that, and this was a podcast from 4 years ago, I don't know if it's changed, they would get 1,000 leads per month coming in through email or phone call or their website. And of those 1,000 leads, they would close 25 loans. So to me, I'm looking at my rookie numbers and I'm saying, okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. I just need to keep working on getting my pipeline up, getting my marketing up, and sticking to my criteria, and making sure that I'm keeping everybody's money safe, and just continuing to evolve and improve my processes so that I can be competitive out there and just keep learning and keep getting better every day that I'm out there, right? It's like that incremental 1% improvement every day is like, thousands of percent improvement over the course of a year. So that is the end of this slideshow. I don't know if any of those items raised any questions in anybody's mind, if anybody has any deals or experiences that are relevant to private money that they want to talk about. Does anybody have any questions for me or any thoughts?
Work with investors, and if they're looking for funds and whatnot.
So
you go, here's proof of funds, and get it afterwards, or what do you do?
So if You're saying if I'm looking for someone to invest in my business?
No, I'm saying if you're gonna lend money to me to
Yep.
do a rehab.
Yeah. And I want proof of funds from you. You want proof of funds from me.
Yes.
Okay.
To put the property under contract.
Yeah, I can show you proof of funds for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep. It's either going to be self-directed IRA situation with a couple of my investors, or it's going to be cash in the bank in a money market in some situations.
I don't need that.
Mm-hmm.
I want BJF Lending to give me proof of funds so that I can submit an offer.
Yeah, and that's
I
what it
need all
is.
of that.
Yeah, so the
Just
way
under your letterhead.
I have some capital, but I'm mostly lending other people's capital. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm whole note placing my investors' capital most of the time is what I'm doing. And in some situations, I'm using my backstop of my friend who has a private debt fund, and they have a $50 million private debt fund, so we can definitely show proof of funds in that case.
You know, I mean, you go to a traditional hard money lender. If I walked up to Brian and said, Brian, I need proof of funds because I'm doing a deal in Northborough and I need to show proof of funds so that I can put an offering on the deal.
Yeah.
What is the name of, I can't remember the company.
It's a pre-approval.
Oh, H1, H2.
It's a weird ass name, I'm sorry.
House 1, House 2.
House 1, House 2, H1,
Yep.
H2.
Yep.
With their letterhead.
Yeah. So BJF
this
Lending.
offer should be viewed as cash.
Yeah.
And whatnot. Do you do the same thing?
Yeah, if that's acceptable. Like if they actually want to see a statement of where the cash is, but I can absolutely write a letter. I mean, when I was flipping houses, I had lenders ask me or sellers ask me for proof of funds, and I literally just went to a website and West Coast Lending that I'd never even met and did no vetting would give me a proof of funds. So I can do that, but I can absolutely provide that, but I can get as specific as actually showing people this is the money in the account and this is exactly where it will come from. Yeah. Just depending on how specific they want to get.
What kind of lending are your investors? Do your investors have a certain type of appetite for lending?
Yeah, right now. So my investors right now are pretty heavily relying on me to do it, and my experience is mostly in residential, single family to be specific.
Yeah.
And so in my capacity, I'm pretty small time right now, and I am maxing out, as you know, because we've looked at some stuff at a couple $1 million max, and that's with my backstop of $50 million private debt fund.
Yeah.
So I'm mainly looking into single family up to 4 unit right now. Some commercial if it really makes sense, but that's not really what I market myself as. Yeah. So mainly single family, flip or buy and hold. That's yeah.
So is the way that you raise money different than a hard money lender, like when they get their funds from?
The term hard money lender, private money lender sometimes gets thrown around interchangeably. Some people would call me a hard money lender. The way that I kind of delineate it is, I'm true private capital. So I really don't have any institutional capital behind me. Even my friend's private debt fund is true private debt. It's not institutional, which means it's not regulated by the SEC or any government agency. And I kind of think of hard money lenders as a little bit more institutional. A lot of the times, I guess I don't know the answer to that. It just depends on what that hard money lender is doing. But typically, I think if people are going over, I don't know many true private money lenders. The biggest one that I know is $50 million private debt fund. I know other people who call themselves private money and they're doing $100 million loans. There's institutional capital involved in that. I can almost guarantee it. So I think that, I guess that people are using hedge funds, people are using venture capital that is a little bit more institutional, because at that level, the way that they're raising capital, again, going back to the SEC and how they can raise that much capital is usually regulated by the SEC. And so that's going to come with certain underwriting criteria that they have to meet. Even starting the fund and operating in a Reg D still comes with a certain amount of regulatory compliance on the underwriting of the loans that you're doing. So once the SEC starts to get involved, they're looking real closely at the books. And my understanding is even operating not as a fund, but a 506B or C Reg D exemption, you have to fill out a Form D. And at that point, you're on the radar. And my understanding is a lot of the times, I guess it depends how big you are, but I've heard that even at that level, they're really starting to look over things pretty closely.
And are these only short-term loans or?
Yeah, I'm typically doing up to 12 months. So it's just, everybody wants to know what my rates are too. I'm usually starting off at 12% and a couple origination points. When money is at that rate, it's usually not going to make sense to be holding on to something like this for years and years. But and I make money on points too. And so the way that most private hard money is structured, that's the case. You can build in an extension fee so that you don't have to do doc fees again if there's a necessary extension. But I usually try to look at the situation and optimize it so that we're not having to do extensions. But I'll usually build in an automatic extension to try to keep the costs down on the legal side of things. And I also try to work with people, and if it goes more than 12 months, that's okay, but there is going to be some kind of extension fee built in. And again, it goes back to looking at that exit strategy. I've said no to loans where I looked at it and I'm like, I'm going to make money. I'm going to get the money back. But I don't think that the investor is going to make much money, and they haven't really done that many deals before. And I said it straight up to them, like, I don't think this is a good deal. I think you should keep looking and be a little more stringent on your criteria, because it just doesn't make sense. You're not going to make any money. So I really only want to be involved in win-win situations, and I try to pass my experience on to my borrowers and not get them into a situation where, they might not make money or even lose money or be in a tight spot. And, with cross collateral, like my mentor was a banker for 30 years, has been doing private money for 12 years now, and he's big on the portfolio lending, cross collateralization. 50% of his portfolio is that. He's never actually taken somebody's property because he's stringent on his underwriting criteria and he wants to set people up for win-win situations. So that's kind of my mentality too, is, I don't want to be predatory and setting people up for failure. Yeah. 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 Well, I really appreciate. Yeah, I appreciate you guys having me. Thank you. All right. So Bernadette. What's that?
That long pause. I got the feeling.
Oh yeah. No. That was yeah. If you guys don't have any more questions, I think we're in pretty good shape. And thank you so much, Bernadette. I appreciate it. Yeah. Hand for Bernadette. Just so you guys know, I've actually known Bernadette. I first went to the New Hampshire RIA in probably 2003, and I've known Bernadette, I guess, for that many years now. So that's pretty cool. Yep.